After 10 years of war, Alexander begged his soldiers to attack India, but everyone called him an arrogant tyrant. At least let us catch our breath. Being deserted by everyone was the consequence of Alexander's boundless ambition. Since childhood, Alexander had claimed that he would follow the example of mythical heroes to conquer the world, but his teacher Aristotle said that myths were all lies, and the gods would punish those with overly arrogant dreams. However, Alexander refused to believe this. He considered himself the king's most proud son and planned to raise an army to conquer the East once he took the throne. But his father, the king, was about to marry his seventh wife and even said he would make the unborn child in her womb a prince. Alexander panicked. If he becomes a prince, then what am I? Immediately after, he got into a fight with the bride's warlord uncle. As a result, Alexander and his mother were exiled to the border. His mother, however, advised Alexander to kill his father and usurp the throne immediately, otherwise it would be too late once the child was born. Alexander's opportunity soon came. It turned out that the king, in order to consolidate an alliance, married his daughter to Alexander's uncle. Thus, the mother and son were recalled to the capital to attend the wedding. Little did they know that this wedding feast would cost the king his life. Just as the king was giving a toast, a knife struck him from behind. The scene immediately descended into chaos. Alexander's friends quickly took control of the situation. While the assassin was chased down and killed without giving a confession, Alexander rushed onto the stage to check if his father was dead. This was the moment of power transition, and everyone present was forced to witness the ascension of the new king. He pointed the finger at the powerful Persian Empire in the east, since the Persians had waged a 50-year war of aggression against Greece, and his father, as a pioneer against Persia, must have been assassinated by enemy spies. Alexander declared that he would lead Greece to take revenge on Persia. Soon after, the bride and her newborn child were all brutally killed, and the bride's warlord uncle was also executed on charges of treason. After eliminating all internal opposition forces, Alexander finally embarked on his world-shaking eastern expedition, but the Persian Empire in the east was the most powerful empire in the world at that time. Spanning from Egypt to northern India, the great king of Persia gathered all the beauties and treasures of the world in the city of Babylon and even claimed to rebuild the Hanging Gardens. On the other hand, the Macedonian kingdom that Alexander took over had already depleted its national treasury. If he could not achieve a major victory over Persia within a month, his rule would collapse instantly. In response, the Persian general Memnon proposed using the scorched earth tactic, so that Alexander would collapse on his own after running out of supplies. King Darius of Persia was very displeased. In his view, the 20-year-old Alexander was just a child king. Moreover, using such a despicable tactic to fight a small country was an insult to the prestige of the Persian Empire. He ordered his generals to defeat Alexander in an upright manner, using this to make an example of him and warn the rebels in Egypt and India. However, the Macedonian phalanx, improved by Alexander, successfully broke through the Persian formation. After that, they plundered all the surrounding wealth and resources and ordered the execution of all prisoners of war. Alexander's army was instantly revitalized. King Darius was furious, because this battle had humiliated the empire, and rebellions everywhere would become more active. The general had no choice but to reluctantly pledge a military order, saying that he would recapture everything that had been lost. Meanwhile, Alexander pressed his advantage and marched south, continuously conquering cities along the eastern coast of the Aegean Sea, and declaring this a great liberation movement. But when he reached Halicarnassus in the south, he was besieged. After holding out for many days, the Persian general set the city on fire and fled. In the end, Alexander only captured an empty city. Filled with anger, he ordered the massacre of the city. It was not until King Darius saw the general's relics that he realized the seriousness of the situation. He then decided to personally lead an army against Alexander, determined to eliminate this threat once and for all. Alexander did not flinch at all and continued to march into the heart of Persia. However, the battle line was stretched too long, and supplies could not keep up. His deputy Parmenion advised him not to take too big a risk. The previous victory was due to Persia's recklessness, and by this point, the Persians would definitely launch an all-out attack. But Alexander's way of thinking left his deputy speechless. It was said that there was a famous prophecy in the city of Phrygia: whoever could untie the Gordian knot would become the king of all Asia in the future. This prophecy obsessed Alexander, but after observing it for a long time, he could not even find the end of the rope. The generals all thought this legend was ridiculous. Finally, Alexander lost his patience, drew his sword, and cut the knot in one stroke. His men praised him for his boldness, realizing that to become the king of Asia, one still had to rely on warfare. In late August of 333 BCE, King Darius of Persia personally led an army of 100,000 men on an expedition from Babylon. By this time, Alexander had already marched to Syria. The Persian army circled around and recaptured the city of Issus, cutting off Alexander's retreat, and planned to wipe out the Macedonian army there. The two sides fought a decisive battle by the Porus River south of Issus. Alexander's 40,000 troops fought against Persia's 100,000. Darius commanded from the center of the battle line in a chariot and deployed his heavy cavalry on one side of the beach to break through the enemy's formation. Alexander, on the other hand, personally led his elite cavalry on the far right wing. The Macedonian phalanx was in the middle, and his deputy Parmenion led the heavy infantry on the left wing. Since both armies had placed their elite troops on the right wing, the left wing of the Macedonian army, facing the Persian cavalry, was trapped in a bitter fight. Seeing this, the Persians continuously sent more troops to this area in an attempt to break through, and Parmenion could only hold on with great difficulty. However, in the end, the right-wing cavalry led by Alexander was the first to break through the Persian defense line. Then, they joined forces with the Macedonian phalanx to besiege the Persian army in the center of the battlefield. But the Persian army had a larger number of soldiers, and all of them fought tenaciously. If the battle dragged on any longer, it would be unfavorable to Alexander. However, during the battle, he suddenly spotted Darius' position. Alexander led his elite cavalry to charge at Darius. The infantry and archers on the left wing of the Persian army could not stop the cavalry at all. Although Darius was surrounded by a large number of royal bodyguards, casualties mounted on both sides, causing the defense line to become increasingly thin. This put Darius at risk of being captured alive at any moment. If that happened, the Persian army would collapse instantly. So Darius fled the battlefield on his horse, seeing that their commander had run away. The confused Persian army also fled one after another. They were pursued and killed by the Macedonian army, which further increased the casualties of the Persian army. Alexander led his cavalry in pursuit for 40 kilometers, but did not even catch a glimpse of Darius. The Battle of Issus caused the Persian Empire to completely lose its western territories, and Darius' wife and daughter were captured by Alexander, which made him deeply regretful, because Darius' wife was from a royal family, and he himself had no noble bloodline. He had gained the legitimacy to ascend the throne through this marriage. Now that his wife was captured, his throne would inevitably become unstable. So Darius sent a letter to Alexander, humbly seeking peace. He offered to cede all the territories that Alexander had already occupied and pay a large ransom in exchange for his wife and daughter. Alexander's subordinates all thought this was a very good deal. After all, such a large territory needed to be properly managed and integrated. But Alexander angrily rebuked them for being short-sighted. He was confident that he could conquer the entire Persian Empire and declared that he would become the king of the whole world. However, Alexander did not take advantage of his victory to march eastward. Instead, he planned to first march south to conquer Egypt. As the granary of the Persian Empire, Egypt's abundant grain production could support millions of people, so Alexander extracted information about the deployment of Persian troops in the western part of the empire from the Persian queen and formulated corresponding tactics. He cleared the eastern coast of the Mediterranean all the way and marched straight to Egypt. This made the Persian princess very dissatisfied with her mother. "Why did you betray father?" The Persian queen, however, was in great pain and helplessness. "I did this all for you," she said. "The only reason Alexander treats us mother and daughter with courtesy is because I still have value to him. Otherwise, our fate would be extremely miserable." The Persian princess had no choice but to accept her fate. When Alexander arrived in Egypt, he did not launch a fierce attack. Instead, he stated that he had come for peace. To the surprise of all his soldiers, the Egyptian army allowed Alexander's troops to enter without a fight. It turned out that the Egyptians had long been oppressed by the Persian Empire. Every time the Persians came, they only knew how to plunder gold and grain. But Alexander was completely different. As soon as he arrived, he praised Egypt. "I have admired this civilized country since I was a child. Even my teacher Aristotle called Egypt a shining and precious gem. I have come here to make Egypt the center of world civilization." Facts prove that Alexander was not boasting. He founded the city of Alexandria on the northern coast of Egypt, named after himself. The Library of Alexandria there became a cultural grand event in the Mediterranean world at that time, and the Lighthouse of Alexandria built by his successors was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. But initially, conquering Egypt was not so easy. The Egyptians were afraid of being retaliated against for betraying the Persian Empire, so Alexander had to show his sincerity. Therefore, he put on fancy eye makeup and was crowned pharaoh, proving with this act that he was willing to share weal and woe with Egypt. The Egyptian people were convinced and knelt down before him, while his generals looked confused. When Darius heard about this, he was almost amused to anger. Those Egyptians resisted me so fiercely before. Why did they become obedient subjects in Alexander's hands? He cursed the Egyptians as disgusting bugs. Now that Alexander had occupied this fertile land, it would be extremely difficult to destroy him in the future. Alexander had another new plan: to go deep into the Sahara Desert to worship in a temple. Because the priestly class in Egypt was still very powerful, becoming pharaoh only gave him the secular legitimacy to rule Egypt. He also needed to gain religious legitimacy. His deputy Parmenion was very dissatisfied. He believed that they should take advantage of the victory to pursue the enemy. In fact, Parmenion's suggestion was steady and correct for an ordinary monarch. However, Alexander was destined to be extraordinary. He traveled until it was late, striking only when he could, and occasionally encountered sandstorms. Through unyielding perseverance and countless hardships, he finally found the Temple of Siwa. This temple enshrined Egypt's sun god, so he sought an oracle here. Upon his return, he declared himself the son of the gods. Enthusiastic crowds lined the streets to welcome him. From then on, Alexander's rule over Egypt was as solid as a mountain, for in the eyes of the Egyptians, he was a living deity. His deputy was amused. Such tricks might fool ordinary people, but it was absurd for their own men to play along. Now he was both pharaoh and a god, and spent his days in bed learning Persian from the Persian queen. When would this ever end? When Darius heard the news that Alexander had returned as a deified ruler, he fumed. "You claim to be a god? Then I will be the godslayer." But what drove Darius to despair was that the Persian queen died in childbirth after becoming pregnant with Alexander's child. Alexander buried the queen with royal ceremonies, a common political performance tactic of his. He also ordered his men to inform Darius of this, deliberately tormenting him emotionally. After settling affairs in Egypt, Alexander finally set out once more on his campaign to attack Persia. King Darius could not afford another defeat. This time, he even recalled troops from the eastern border regions and Indian garrisons, mobilizing nearly the entire empire's military strength. And for Alexander, this would be the pinnacle battle of his life. In October 331 BC, Alexander led 40,000 troops into the final decisive battle against the Persian Empire's 200,000-strong army on the Gaugamela plain, north of Babylon. The Macedonian formation was roughly the same as before, except that angled flanking lines were added on both sides to guard against the Persians using their numerical advantage to outflank and encircle. King Darius, having learned bitter lessons from previous failures, strengthened his right wing to break through the Macedonian left flank faster. In the center, he deployed scythe chariots to charge and disrupt the Macedonian phalanx, and even had the central part of the battlefield flattened in advance to facilitate the Persian chariots' charge. In theory, Alexander had no chance of winning. Deputy could only defend with great difficulty against the Persians' numerical superiority. Though he was skilled at holding off larger forces to buy time for Alexander, the Persian assault was too fierce this time. Fearing he might collapse at any moment, he sent messengers to beg Alexander for reinforcements. In the center, while the Macedonians intercepted and evaded the chariot attacks, a gap opened up between the center and left flank. King Darius seized this opportunity, sending cavalry to break through and charge straight for the Macedonian camp. The fall of the camp where family members were being held pushed the Macedonian army to the brink of collapse. Meanwhile, the elite cavalry led by Alexander played a race with the Persian cavalry. He kept moving sideways to stretch the Persian lines. The Persians chased relentlessly, trying to encircle him, which gradually created a gap in the Persian left flank. Alexander seized this decisive moment, suddenly turning his cavalry to charge straight at King Darius. Once again, history seemed to repeat itself, but this time, King Darius chose to fight to the end. He could not bear the humiliation of another devastating defeat. However, a javelin struck and killed the charioteer of Darius' chariot. Amid the chaos and poor visibility, many soldiers thought Darius himself had been killed and began fleeing the battlefield. Forced by those around him, King Darius had no choice but to flee once more. Just as Alexander prepared to pursue, Deputy Parmenion's reinforcements arrived and news of the camp's fall also reached him. The Persian frontline troops still did not know Darius had fled, so they continued to fiercely besiege the Macedonians. Without immediate reinforcements, the entire army would truly collapse. With a heavy heart, Alexander ordered his troops to turn back and rescue the camp. The Battle of Gaugamela completely crushed the Persian Empire's resistance. Darius' flight allowed Alexander to enter Babylon without a fight. This millennia-old capital fell, and the Macedonian kingdom became the new hegemon of the Middle East. Alexander stood atop the palace, overlooking the empire. The feeling of being the world's ruler was unexpectedly exhilarating and grand. The women of the Persian harem were left for him and his soldiers to choose from at will. Yet Alexander immediately began to prepare for danger in times of peace. For as long as King Darius lived, he could not legitimately claim the Persian throne. Darius fled to the eastern mountains, waging a protracted guerrilla war, clinging to the fantasy of one day restoring the Persian Empire's glory. But the soldiers following him grew increasingly discontent. They wondered how long they would have to live like fugitives. Eventually, they assassinated Darius. Soon after, Alexander found Darius' body. He paid high respect to this old rival, holding a funeral for him with the highest honors. Finally, he executed Bessus the assassin on charges of regicide. This allowed Alexander to formally take over the entire Persian Empire. His men cheered in celebration of his ascension, naively believing they would spend the rest of their lives enjoying wealth and prosperity. Little did they know that the thrill and glory of conquest had intoxicated Alexander. He ordered preparations to conquer the entire world. After conquering the Persian Empire, Alexander continued his eastern expedition into Central Asia, only to face fierce resistance from local tribes. In response, he burned, killed, and plundered along the way, building Alexandria's cities as military outposts. He even married a new wife to stabilize rule in the border regions. His soldiers could only show helpless expressions and criticized him fiercely in meetings. But Alexander had his own justification. If I don't do this, these tribal peoples will keep rebelling. This only enraged the generals. We trained with you since childhood, studied under Aristotle with you, and finally helped you ascend to the throne. We Macedonians won this empire. Why should a barbarian's son be your heir? The argument grew more intense. Alexander dismissed Parmenion, the veteran general who had spoken out most strongly against him, sending him back to the capital to manage administrative affairs. He then continued his eastern expedition, conscripting more soldiers from the newly conquered regions. His men grew more and more dissatisfied. They not only had to chase and fight savages in remote mountains and forests, but also spend money and effort building roads and cities for primitive tribes. They cursed Alexander as a tyrant and attempted to assassinate him, but the plot was uncovered and they were put on trial. Even the son of the loyal veteran Parmenion was involved. Alexander had him tortured and then executed, but a son's crime implied the father's complicity. Immediately after, Alexander sent trusted men back to Babylon, who executed Parmenion on charges of treason. After this round of internal purges, the generals dared not voice any more opposition. Alexander then reached what was believed in Greek mythology to be the end of the world, the Hindu Kush Mountains in present-day Afghanistan. Legend claimed that crossing these mountains would reveal the sea at the end of the world, but the Pamir Mountains before him made him hesitate. Legend said the other side of the mountains was the world of the Titans, while to the south lay the vast Indian subcontinent. Alexander felt both disappointed and excited. Perhaps the world was even larger than described in myths, but his close companions urged him to stop. You've conquered enough. This is more than enough to prove your greatness. Even Alexander's mother sent him a letter, begging him to turn back. Don't chase that illusory dream in the distant east any longer. Return to Babylon and consolidate the empire you fought so hard to build. But Alexander grew more unwilling to give up. He resolutely marched south to conquer India, for in myths, India was the land where the sun rises. He thought that after conquering it, he might finally see the sea at the end of the world. When they saw monkeys, they mistook them for hairy savages, attacked them as if facing a great enemy, and even tried to learn monkey language to extract intelligence. Alexander was also amazed by the ascetics meditating under trees, who were said to live to be 200 years old. The many tribes of northwest India were no match for him. Alexander quickly occupied vast territories there, building 2 Alexandria cities in the Indus Valley as military outposts. The Indians did everything they could to curry favor with Alexander, flattering him as the greatest king in the world. Hoping this plague would leave quickly, this only made Alexander more arrogant. He believed his achievements had surpassed those of mythical heroes. In front of his companions and elders, he acted as if he alone was worthy of respect, even demanding that they bow down to him like ordinary subjects. Alexander appointed his trusted Clitus as governor of the East. Clitus was the uncle who had saved Alexander's life on the battlefield, but to Clitus, being governor in this desolate land felt no different from exile. Alexander retorted sharply, "Every piece of land in my empire is sacred. I will not allow you to despise the Eastern people." The two argued fiercely while drunk. Finally, in a fit of rage, Alexander stabbed Clitus to death with a spear. Another close confidant was lost to him forever. The southern expedition grew increasingly perilous. Continuous heavy rains dealt a heavy blow to the army's morale. Their supplies and food began to rot and mold, and many men were killed by poisonous snakes in the tropical rainforests. Terror and ill omens lurked everywhere. Gradually, the army mutinied. They begged Alexander to stop the expedition. "You are a lofty god, but we are just lowly mortals. What does it matter if you reach the end of the world? Only your name will be recorded in heroic legends. We will just be shadows beneath your feet. Your dream is to conquer the world, but ours is just to go home and see our wives and children." Alexander tried to encourage them with glory and money, but this time, unlike before, no amount of increased pay or pensions could persuade them to continue. They feared they would die before they could enjoy their rewards, but Alexander was already dazzled by the conquest tales and myths. As the self-proclaimed son of the gods, he believed he was destined to conquer the entire world. He made a promise to the men: just one more month of campaigning. After that, we will return home and retire. He executed the leaders of the mutiny, then continued his journey to find the end of the world. Soon, Alexander faced the final great battle of his life. As they pushed deeper into the heart of India, they encountered stubborn resistance from the kingdom of Porus. The Indians deployed war elephants, rendering Alexander's cavalry nearly useless. As the horses were terrified by the elephants' roars and footsteps and refused to advance, the Macedonian soldiers could only shout to boost their courage, then force themselves to charge at Porus' army. They used the dense Macedonian phalanx to pierce the enemy lines, hurling javelins and shooting arrows at the oncoming Indians. King Porus fought bravely, killing countless Macedonian soldiers, but his two sons were finally slain in battle. The frightened, enraged elephants began to charge wildly, trampling everything in their path, inflicting heavy casualties on both sides. Later, Alexander figured out the Indians' war elephants' weakness and used guerrilla tactics against them, retreating when the elephants charged, chasing when the elephants fled, and hurling javelins from a distance to provoke the elephants. This made the enraged elephants trample their own Indian soldiers. In the end, India was completely defeated, but Alexander's army was too exhausted to fight on. The soldiers could no longer adapt to the sweltering, humid climate. Various diseases spread through the ranks, causing massive casualties, and the men's desire to end the war grew stronger. Alexander himself was seriously wounded during the campaign. He had urged his warhorse forward, charging recklessly at the Indian war elephants in an attempt to kill King Porus.
Last time, let's see what happens.
Alexander was rescued by his companions and carried off the battlefield, but his beloved warhorse, who had accompanied him for over a decade, was killed in the fight. This dealt a crushing blow to Alexander's enthusiasm for conquest. He finally realized he could not conquer every country or every people. Reluctantly, he announced to his soldiers, "This is the end of our journey. We will return home." The men cheered at his wise decision, but Alexander could not let go of his disappointment. Though his expeditionary force had traversed plains, mountains, rivers, and deserts without a single defeat, he had still failed to conquer the entire world like the mythical heroes he admired. Before leaving India, he left a garrison behind, hoping for a future expedition. He also built an altar there, praying to Zeus to watch over their journey home. While returning west, they continued to defeat rebellious tribes, but what killed the most soldiers was the harsh natural environment. It took them 3 years to finally return to their capital, Babylon. The royal harem gathered on the city walls to welcome their king's return, but within days of indulging in a life of luxury and debauchery, Alexander's dream of conquering the world was reignited. He began building warships and conscripting soldiers, preparing to launch a new expedition. His next targets were the Arabian Peninsula to the south, and Rome and Carthage to the west. But the soldiers had finally had enough of Alexander's arrogance and cruelty. As a self-proclaimed god, he was unpredictable and violent, killing at the slightest provocation. Many close confidants were executed arbitrarily, leaving everyone living in fear, and Alexander's dream of conquest left them exhausted and angry. In the end, his ambitions were just to satisfy his endless desire for conquest. The upcoming expedition would bring no glory, only a meaningless disaster. Soon after, Alexander fell seriously ill with a high fever. Even while lying in bed, he insisted on discussing expedition plans with his generals. Gradually, he could no longer speak clearly. The generals looked at him with no sympathy, only urging him to name an heir before he died. Alexander lifted the royal ring, a symbol of power, to his hand, but he never managed to announce who his successor would be. After Alexander's death, his generals fought frantically over his body, hoping to gain legitimacy for their own claims to the throne. As a result, Alexander's corpse remained unburied for a long time. His mother, wives, and children were also brutally killed in the power struggle for the throne. The glorious Alexandrian Empire, after existing for only 14 years, collapsed instantly. I'm a movie enthusiast. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.